It's 1995, and somewhere in a London recording studio, five lads from Manchester are staring at the biggest problem any band can have. They've just written the perfect pop song, and now they have to figure out what the hell to do next. Wonderwall is about to make them the most famous band on the planet. But here's the thing nobody tells you about getting everything you've ever wanted. It's absolutely terrifying. This is the story of what happens after you conquer the world, when the hunger that made you great gets replaced by the pressure to stay great, when being the best band in Britain isn't enough anymore, because now you have to be the best band that ever lived. When five working-class lads from Manchester discover that success is just failure wearing a better suit. Spoiler alert, it involves enough coke to make Al Pacino OD, the most expensive album ever made at the time, and every wedding and karaoke in Britain. But before we dive into this beautiful disaster of ego, excess, and pharmaceutical enhancement, quick thing. If you survived my descent into pre-Wonderwall madness and want to see how the other half lives, smash that subscribe button because apparently I'm now professionally documenting the rise and fall of British rock bands, which wasn't the career path I planned, but here we are. Also, like the video because the algorithm demands blood sacrifice, and I'd rather it be your engagement than my mental health. Right, let's get properly unhinged about how to accidentally destroy the greatest thing you'll ever create. So, August 1994. Definitely Maybe comes out and immediately becomes the fastest-selling debut album in UK history. A small curiosity is that this feat was passed by the Arctic Monkeys 12 years later with another album that's a masterpiece. Comment if you want to see me touch this. Oasis go from playing to 12 people and their dealer to being the most important band in Britain basically overnight. Which is exactly what they always said would happen, except now it's actually happening, and nobody knows how to handle it. The thing about sudden success is that it doesn't feel real at first. One day you're worried about paying rent, the next day you're on top of the pops getting screamed at by teenagers who weren't listening to music 6 months ago. It's like waking up in someone else's life, except that someone is richer and more famous, but also more confused. Noel's handling it by becoming even more arrogant, which shouldn't be mathematically possible but somehow is. He's giving interviews claiming they're better than every band that's ever existed, including bands that haven't formed yet. Liam's handling it by perfecting his walk, his sneer, and his ability to start fights with inanimate objects. But the real pressure is coming from Creation Records. Alan McGee's watching his biggest gamble pay off spectacularly, but now he needs them to do it again, except bigger and better, and immediately, because the music industry doesn't believe in things like creative development or taking time to process success. So they go back into the studio in 1995 to make What's the Story Morning Glory, and the pressure is insane. Not just commercial pressure, artistic pressure. How do you follow up the fastest-selling debut album in UK history? How do you improve on perfect? How do you write songs that are better than songs that are already changing people's lives? Noel's solution is to go even bigger. If Definitely Maybe was about conquering Britain, Morning Glory is about conquering the universe. Every song has to be an anthem. Every chorus has to be designed for stadium sing-alongs. Every guitar riff has to be memorable enough to survive being played by drunk people at house parties for the next 30 years. And somehow, impossibly, it works. Tony McCarroll leaves during the Morning Glory sessions. He plays on Some Might Say, but can't handle the other tracks, which are harder. Alan White, a virtuoso jazz drummer recommended by Noel's buddy Paul Weller, comes in. Roll With It comes out first, and it's basically Oasis doing glam rock, all stomping beats and ridiculous confidence. Then Wonderwall happens, and suddenly they're not just the biggest band in Britain, they're a global phenomenon. But before we get to the drug-fueled studio excess, there's the small matter of the Battle of Britpop. August 1995. Oasis versus Blur, Roll With It versus Country House, the most overhyped musical rivalry since the last time the British music press decided two bands represented the entire future of civilization. Now, I've done a whole video on this feud, so I won't go into every detail here, but the beautiful irony is how differently the two camps remember it. Go into any Blur discussion online, and it's all Oasis, Oasis, Oasis. They're still defining themselves in relation to that rivalry. But check out Oasis fans talking amongst themselves. It's just Oasis, Oasis, Oasis. They barely mention Blur, because in the end, Oasis won so comprehensively that the fight stopped mattering to them. Gorillaz also cannibalized Blur in the end, to be honest. Anyway, Blur sold more singles that week, but Oasis sold more albums, more tickets, and basically conquered the world while Damon Albarn was still explaining why winning doesn't actually matter. Though, to be fair to Damon, he got the last laugh by creating Gorillaz, which became way more culturally significant than Blur ever was. Suddenly, Blur became that band the Gorillaz guy was in before, which must sting a bit. But the rivalry serves a purpose, beyond tabloid headlines. It gives both bands something to define themselves against. Oasis can be the unpretentious people's champions, while Blur are the art school posers. Easy narrative, clean battle lines, perfect for music journalists who need to fill column inches. After the Blur victory lap, Wonderwall becomes so successful that it stops being just a song and becomes a cultural artifact. It's the song that drunk people sing at karaoke. It's the song that gets played at weddings and funerals and football matches. It's the song that defines an entire generation's relationship with British music, which should be amazing, except it also becomes a prison. Because once you've written Wonderwall, everything else you do gets compared to Wonderwall. Every new song is either their new Wonderwall or not as good as Wonderwall. You become defined by your biggest success, which means your biggest success also becomes your biggest problem. The success of Morning Glory is overwhelming. They're selling millions of albums, headlining festivals, being treated like returning heroes everywhere they go. But success at this level isn't just about the music anymore. It's about the lifestyle, the image, the mythology. And the mythology is getting complicated. The Gallagher brothers are now characters in an ongoing soap opera that happens to have a soundtrack. Every interview becomes a performance. Though, to be fair to Noel, his interviews are genuinely funnier than most professional comedians. The man's basically a stand-up comic who happens to write brilliant songs. His press conferences are masterclasses in deadpan wit and perfectly timed put-downs. Liam's, meanwhile, developing into this fascinating contradiction, arrogant and vulnerable, confrontational, and oddly endearing. Both the brothers have this wonderful human quality underneath all the bluster. They're genuinely passionate about music, fiercely loyal to their fans, and despite all the posturing, you get the sense they're still just two lads from Manchester who can't quite believe any of this is real. The drugs aren't helping. I mean, they never help, but at this level of fame, they really don't help. Everyone's on something. Cocaine mostly, because it's the 90s and cocaine is what successful people do. But cocaine doesn't make you more creative. It just makes you think you're more creative while actually making you more paranoid and difficult to work with. Liam's developing his full rock star persona. The clothes, the attitude, the ability to ordering a cup of tea into a confrontational experience. Noel's becoming more controlling, more perfectionist, more convinced that he's the only person in the band that actually matters. The rest of the band, Bonehead on rhythm guitar, Giggsy on bass, and Whitey on drums, are watching this transformation with growing unease. They're still the same people they were 2 years ago, but Noel and Liam are becoming something else entirely. Then comes Knebworth, August 1996. 2 nights, 125,000 people each night, 2.5 million people applying for tickets. At this point, Oasis aren't just playing concerts, they're hosting cultural events. This isn't just about the music anymore, it's about being present at history being made. The Knebworth shows are the peak of everything Oasis represented. The communal singing, the sense of shared experience, the feeling that being British and working class and passionate about music was something to be proud of, rather than apologetic about. For 2 nights, they're not just a band, they're the voice of a generation. But peaks are dangerous places to linger, because once you've played to 250,000 people over 2 nights, once you've had 2.5 million people desperately trying to see you perform, where do you go next? How do you top the untoppable? Noel's answer is characteristic. You spend more money than anyone has ever spent on an album, you take so many drugs that reality becomes negotiable, and you try to create something so ambitious that it either becomes a masterpiece or destroys you in the attempt. Be Here Now begins recording in early 1997, and immediately everything is different. They're full, they're established, they're trying to maintain themselves. The studio sessions become legendary for all the wrong reasons. Industrial quantities of cocaine, songs that go on for 7 minutes because nobody's brave enough to tell Noel that longer doesn't automatically mean better. Guitar solos that sound like they're being played from inside a wind tunnel because more effects obviously equals more artistic. The recording process for Be Here Now becomes a cocaine-fueled nightmare of perfectionism and self-indulgence. Noel's laying guitar after guitar after guitar until individual songs sound like entire orchestras having nervous breakdowns. Every song is an epic. Every chorus is designed for stadiums they might never fill again. Here's the cruel irony. Oasis become everything they criticized Blur for being: pretentious, overproduced, more concerned with being clever than being good. Meanwhile, Blur released their self-titled album the same year, and it's their most direct, unpretentious work ever. The art school kids make a garage rock album, while the people's champions disappear up their own artistic ambitions. Meanwhile, Liam's developing into a full-time professional irritant. He's missing recording sessions, starting fights with journalists, and generally behaving like someone who's never been told no by anyone with the authority to make it stick. His relationship with Patsy Kensit becomes tabloid fodder, because apparently being in the biggest band in the world isn't enough. You also have to marry someone famous. The band dynamic is fracturing. Bonehead and Giggsy are increasingly sidelined as Noel takes more and more control over every aspect of the music. They're in the band, but they're not really contributing to the band anymore. They're well-paid session musicians in their own group. Be Here Now comes out in August 1997, and initially it looks like another triumph. Fastest-selling album in UK history, again, massive commercial success, critics initially praising it as their most ambitious work yet. But then, people actually listen to it, and keep listening to it, and slowly realize that ambition doesn't automatically equal achievement, that expensive studio time doesn't guarantee good songs, that Phil Spector wall of sound production can bury great melodies under layers of shoegazy nonsense. Because here's the thing about Be Here Now. The songs are good. Some of them are genuinely brilliant. Do You Know What I Mean has an incredible melody hidden under 7 minutes of studio masturbation. The Girl in the Dirty Shirt and Don't Go Away are beautiful pieces of songwriting drowning in their own production. The B-sides, Going Nowhere, My Sister Lover, and Stay Young, are genuinely incredible. Strip away the cocaine-induced studio excess and you've got some of Noel's finest work. But nobody can hear it through the wall of sound. Every song is so layered, so processed, so bloody long, that the melodies get lost. 10-minute guitar solos don't make songs better, they make them exhausting. The tragedy is that the Master Plan compilation comes out in 1998, collecting B-sides from up to that era, and according to Noel himself, it's everything Be Here Now should have been: focused, melodic, immediate. The songs that didn't make it onto the album are better than most of what did. The cocaine isn't just affecting the music, it's affecting their judgment. Nobody in the studio has enough perspective to say, maybe this guitar solo doesn't need to be 3 minutes long. Nobody has enough distance to ask, does this song actually need to exist? But the real problem isn't the drugs or the excess or even the bloated songs. The real problem is that they've lost the thing that made them special in the first place: the hunger. They're no longer trying to prove they belong. They're trying to prove they deserve to stay where they are. The backlash begins almost immediately. Critics who initially praised Be Here Now start admitting they were wrong. Fans who bought it start admitting they don't actually listen to it. The album that was supposed to cement their legacy becomes the thing that makes people question whether they were ever as good as they seemed. Britpop is dying around them. Blur are experimenting with different sounds, Pulp are getting weird, Radiohead are disappearing into electronic landscapes, but Oasis are stuck being Oasis, trying to recreate something that worked in 1995 but feels increasingly irrelevant in 1998. The touring cycle for Be Here Now is when the cracks really start showing. The magic of the Knebworth shows can't be recaptured because they're not the same band anymore. They're technically better, more professional, but they've lost the spark that made those early shows feel like religious experiences. Liam and Noel's relationship deteriorates to the point where they're barely speaking. They're communicating through intermediaries, through interviews, through passive-aggressive song lyrics. The band that was supposed to be about brotherhood and working-class solidarity becomes a case study on how success can poison relationships. Giggsy leaves in 1999, burned out and fed up with the dysfunction. Bonehead follows shortly after. The classic Definitely Maybe lineup is gone, replaced by hired musicians who can play the songs but don't have the history, the chemistry, the shared experience of climbing from nothing to everything. By 1999, Noel's getting off the drugs, coming down from years of cocaine-fueled creativity and discovering that reality without chemical enhancement is a much darker, more complicated place. The first song he writes post Be Here Now is called Let's All Make Believe, and the title alone tells you everything you need to know about his mental state. The withdrawal process forces him to confront what Oasis have become, versus what they started as. So he starts experimenting. Electronic sounds, trip-hop influences, anything that doesn't sound like 5 guitars playing the same 3-chord progression. The working-class hero who conquered the world with 3-chord anthems is trying to figure out how to evolve without losing their identity. And I say working-class hero, not working-class heroes, because Noel basically did everything himself, except for some of the drums, done by Whitey, but many of them are drum loops and samples done by Noel. Noel's stupidly talented, yeah. Listen to Standing on the Shoulders of Giants with that in mind, and you'll see Noel on his Brian Wilson era, experimenting in the studio and doing everything by himself. By the time they're working on Standing on the Shoulders of Giants in 1999, Oasis have become a different band entirely. Not just because they're now Noel's solo project with Liam and Whitey as support members. Still successful, still capable of writing good songs, but no longer the same force of nature that exploded out of Manchester 5 years earlier. The tragedy isn't that they became unsuccessful. They remained commercially viable for another decade. The tragedy is that they became ordinary. The band that once felt like they could do anything became a band that did the same thing over and over again, hoping it would work as well as it did the first time. Be Here Now isn't a bad album because it's incompetent. It's a bad album because it's the sound of a great band discovering that they're no longer great and trying to compensate with volume and ambition and expensive studio tricks instead of remembering what made them great in the first place. The saddest part is you can hear what they were trying to do. They wanted to make their Sgt. Pepper's their definitive artistic statement. But Sgt. Pepper's worked because the Beatles were still growing as artists. Be Here Now fails because Oasis were trying to become something they'd already stopped being. But that's a story for another time. Because after Be Here Now, after the departures and the disappointments and the slow realization that lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place, they still had to figure out how to be Oasis without being the Oasis that everyone fell in love with. And that, as they say, is where things get really interesting. If this caffeinated exploration of success as slow-motion car crash rewired your brain in uncomfortable ways, smash that subscribe button because apparently I'm now professionally documenting how great bands destroy themselves, which is somehow both depressing and fascinating. Also like the video because the algorithm is basically a casino designed by people who hate happiness, and your engagement is the only thing that convinces it I'm not just shouting into the void. Right. I'm off to contemplate how you can be the biggest band in the world and still feel like a failure. See you in the comments, you beautiful disillusioned bastards.